Hello, and welcome to Bureau Veritas's webinar on remote inspection. I want to start off our conversation today by acknowledging the situation we're faced as an organization, our customers are faced with, and as global citizens we're all faced with. It's unprecedented times for us, and we're talking about remote inspections because of that, but we want to be careful about how we talk about the service. So first and foremost, I think it's important to take a moment and just remind everyone that our primary concern throughout these times is for everyone's health and safety. It's an absolute at Bureau Veritas, and applies to everything we do. That being said, remote inspection services allows us to deal with this situation in new ways. It allows us to keep business going and keep our core processes and operations going. It also allows us to protect our employees, our partners, and our vendors as we work together to work through this situation. Our objective today and what we want to work through is ultimately just to share the information that we've gained over our experience with deploying these services in various parts of the organization, in various geographies, in various service lines, and in various use cases. And so how we want to do that is we're going to first talk about what our journeys look like and some of the lessons we've learned along the way, and talk about where we feel the acceleration and adoption is really going to come from. To make sure that we contextualize this in real-world deployments, we are going to go through some detailed use cases so you can see how the value is being created for our customers. And we also do want to talk about how easy it is to deploy and give you some thoughts and some takeaways for you to digest as you think about how your business can take advantage of this service and of this technology. And then finally, we're going to open up with some Q&A. So supporting the webinar today, you have myself, Kyle Paul. I'm the Vice President of Digital Solutions for the North American region of Bureau Veritas. We also have Christopher Donaleski, who is the service lead for our remote inspections. And we also have the privilege of being joined by Keith Grogan. He is our Vice President of Industrial Inspections within our industry group. And we also have Kim Pluti joining us, and she is the Vice President and COO of our Quick Track division. When we talk about remote inspections, it can mean a lot of different things to different people. And so when we think about it, we kind of break it down to these three basic categories. The first category is that remote inspection or that third-party inspection. So this is a situation where we have the supplier or the vendor or the customer that we're working with on site. And this gives them a means to communicate and stream activity directly to us via the internet, to a Bureau Veritas representative. The second use case is really around remote supervision and the second-party inspection. And so this is an instance where you've got our BV inspectors or technicians that are on site, and we can work directly with them, so connecting a Bureau Veritas representative to those individuals. The third category often gets a lot of attention because it's an exciting category. This is where you get the next generation of technology really showcasing some of the cool things that can be done with it. And so the augmented or mixed reality inspection service allows us to bring in other data elements such as 3D models and overlay that onto our asset, or overlay that onto our site, so we can get an understanding of what it actually is looking like compared to the design or to the engineering models. So all three represent different approaches. But there are common value drivers throughout each of them. If we look at this from a more visual perspective, we can start to see what these use cases look like in real life. And the reality is, when we really boil it down, all we're talking about is connections. It's about connecting customers with Bureau Veritas in real time. But more importantly, I think it's about the deep connections that exist or can be created when we start bringing together customers, inspectors, experts, data, supply chains, workflows, and decision makers. And when you bring all these elements together, that allows us to really achieve more efficient and better outcomes. So if we want to think about what those value drivers are, a little differently, we can kind of go into specifics about it. So I'm going to start on the top left-hand side here. As we think about being able to connect into sites, one of the obvious and biggest value drivers is the fact that we don't have to spend time traveling to that site. And so what the impact of that reduced travel is that it ultimately reduces the carbon footprint that we're creating as an organization. We're faced with one global pandemic right now, but we also have this backdrop of a global concern around CO2 emissions. So it's really something that's close to my heart, and I think it's going to be close to all of our hearts on this call to some degree. Moving to the right, as we reduce those number of inspectors that are traveling and having to get on site, there's also an implication to health and safety. And luckily, we're able to reduce that health and safety risk to the individuals by avoiding that travel. I think for a personal level, one of the most dangerous things I do in a day is actually hop in my car and drive to work. So if we're able to reduce kind of long travels, long travel durations, that certainly helps to reduce our exposure. It also helps to reduce the amount of site access training requirements that individuals need to have, and that can help to expedite any of the service deliveries. From an asset quality risk mitigation perspective, it was interesting in the early days of COVID-19, we did see an initial movement to say, okay, well, maybe we'll just hold off on this inspection for a while. And so it became this trade-off between incurring some risk in that organization because they were just going to bypass a very important critical step of the process. And so we don't have to go that far. So we can find the middle ground. We can still accomplish that risk mitigation activity through these technologies. The other thing it does is it really gives us real-time access to an extensive network of Bureau Veritas experts. So you can imagine if you have to a complex inspection that you have to deliver on. You often would draw upon multiple resources. So now we can send one or no inspectors to site, yet still tap into that expertise from the wider network by supporting a digital collaboration with some of our tools that we have ready for you guys. The other thing is around speed. Time is money, and speed continues to be an important driver for a lot of the innovation and a lot of the development initiatives that we see ourselves going under and that we see our customers are going through. And so real-time global inspections allow us to eliminate that travel time and really just get to a point where we can make faster decisions and expedite the process overall. So putting all these together, we certainly get a lot of cost avoidance that starts to add up, travel, mileage expenses, and that certainly helps. The other benefit that we see that really comes out of this is the fact that our customers can now participate in real time with the inspection. You have the ability to annotate and to capture videos and photos in real time. And so you've got that digital record for that inspection that can be referenced later on. And also that real-time interaction with an inspector from a variety of stakeholders really helps to elevate the quality of that and make sure everyone feels comfortable with what's going on with that inspection. When we take all this, the value drivers are really evident, and there's some strong cases there for why this service should be used. But if we're frank or if we're candid about it, the reality is it's still relatively early on in its adoption, and so I think it's important to put that in the context of a maturity model, so we can understand where we've been, where we are, and more importantly, where we're going. From our perspective, really, when we look at market acceptance, really what we're talking about there is it's a function of time. So early on, it's driven by early adopters and change agents, and then it starts to get deployed in a couple more use cases. And then as we start to see the service offering mature, it becomes a standard component of the service delivery. When you get to widespread adoption, that's where we're going to see it fully incorporated into all the stakeholders' SOPs. And then finally, when it's optimized and repeatable, that's actually the point where we start to say, okay, what's next? Because clearly this thing is mature, and we already have people working on that next disruptive wave. So I won't go through all these in detail. I think market acceptance is really the important one. But from a hardware perspective, from our view, that's really around answering the question of, can it do what I need it to do? From a software application perspective, I think one of the big drivers there as we evolve the service offering, it really comes down to ease of use. And then finally, from a data governance perspective, for us, that's a pretty broad topic. It's not just about how you structure your data and how you ensure consistency within that data structure, but it also refers to a larger bucket for us, and it's around integration. And the more integration we have between the various systems, from customers, from end customers to vendors to your inspection body, the more integration and consideration for that data flow that we have throughout that network, the more we elevate the value that's being created. So if we have to ask the question, where are we today? We would answer it this way. From market acceptance perspective, it's still early on. As of 2 weeks ago, I think that's changing day by day right now, and it's still mostly evaluated on a per project basis. From a hardware perspective, we've seen a lot of great strides in what some of our partners and some of our vendors have done, and it's now able to support a diverse set of environmental conditions that it can work in. And from a software perspective, again, there's been some great strides in the last couple of years, and you really have the opportunity to create a holistic solution. And certainly the software applications that we've incorporated into our service offering have become part of our long-term service roadmap. I think it's important to note, though, that as a whole, our strategy on the software application side, we are trying to remain somewhat agnostic. We ultimately want to make sure that we can support our customers' preferences. We'll certainly have some recommendations based on our experience with these applications, but we're here to support you and however it flex to your requirements, and we're certainly willing to do that. From a data governance perspective, we still see it mostly viewed in isolation. So each party may be advanced within their own right, but the interconnectivity between the systems is still pretty light. Then if we think about what COVID is doing, so one of the biggest impacts that we think that COVID-19 is going to have is really drive that market acceptance. So I had a coworker send me this funny meme around who really drove the digital transformation at your company, and I'd like to say that it was the digital solutions team that's really accelerating this, but the reality is COVID-19 is forcing us to move along this curve at a faster rate than we would have otherwise done. Like my grandfather used to always say to me, necessity is the mother of all invention. In reality, though, if we take a step back from the lighthearted view, it does take a collaborative effort across all of those pillars to get this service offering deployed and up to the point where it is today. So we expect that over the next couple of weeks and months, depending on how long this event goes, we're going to see an accelerated adoption, and that's going to help us really drive the service offering up the adoption curve. And again, we don't view this as being short-lived. We think the underlying value drivers of the service offering are certainly good enough and solid enough to allow us to sustain adoption. And we expect that this will be becoming a mainstay of service delivery in a post-COVID-19 world, and that it would be incorporated into the SOPs of all stakeholders. Remote inspections certainly have more benefit and are certainly ideal for some use cases, more so than others. So to give you a sense of where it's really good to look at it, certainly when there's limited or no physical site access, whether the facility is on lockdown or perhaps there's some other risks that pose a health and safety risk, that's a case where remote inspection can certainly be used. In the event that there are experts that are available immediately, This allows us to tap into that network, and so even if an inspector is on another project or site, we can tap into them to help support that immediate task. And certainly in the face of travel bans and other restrictions, it's going to help. And with an ongoing increased focus on reducing our carbon emissions, we do see that being a really good tool to allow companies to achieve their targets that they've set out, or perhaps that they publicly committed to. So this is all at a high level, a theoretical level. So let's transfer this into the real world. Is at this point, I'd like to transfer it over to Christopher Donalesi, who's going to share some of our experiences in more detail and really tease out the benefit that's created for our company at that time and for our customers' company at that time. Christopher?
Thanks, Kyle. Now you have the setup, let's take a look into some specific use cases. One thing to note throughout the next few slides is that these use cases may be shown to provide solutions to specific problems. This is typical in the initial discovery phase while understanding how to leverage all types of technologies, but holistically these solutions are very agnostic in nature and are very flexible. I encourage you to keep this in mind as we touch base on a few areas of the solution and how we got there. We've grouped these categories into a few buckets: inspections and audits, asset management and planning, vendor-assisted and end-user collaboration, enhanced and augmented quality assurance, and internal support and supervision. You will get a feel for how agnostic these solutions are, and we're not so much changing delivery model, but more or less changing the execution type. Just because you have technology doesn't mean you have quality. Remote technology is not new, and if we look at the past, we can see that this is very true. The first phone call was in 1876. The first text message, not until 1992, over 100 years later. Yet technologies like augmented reality that have just started to gain popularity have been around since the 1960s. We need to focus, we do focus, and we should always keep this in mind, that the application of technology is mostly and sometimes more important than the technology itself. So this leads us to our first use case, and that's inventory auditing. QuickTrack, a division in BV, provides field inspections, verifications, and inventory auditing for equipment leasing, commercial lending, and financing industries. The process is simple. Lending needs a loan, they put up collateral, lender only has verbal but no physical validate or verification, and QuickTrack provides the physical validation of that asset or collateral. In recent weeks, the need for remote verification has greatly increased. This has allowed us to better respond to COVID-19, but even before COVID-19, this provided value to all parties. A few value drivers are financial impact. You could say financial impact's always a key driver, and you'd definitely be right, but here we're talking about speed and how that aids in this value. Geotagging and tracking of photos aids in fraud detections and data validation, and then cost reductions in travel effects, carbon footprint, and speed delivery. Our second use case covers internal support and shows a connection to how vendor-assisted inspections can be applicable. Bureau Veritas Primary Integrations is a division of BV that provides site QA/QC through its transitional phase services program that focuses on system readiness for the functional testing phase of data center commissioning. In this case, QA inspectors have certain skills and need to be able to transfer their knowledge or conduct the inspection utilizing another person on the other side. To illustrate this, we have one inspector at each facility. A third facility requires inspections. However, due to travel bans, Inspector 1 cannot make it to site. Utilizing remote inspections, Inspector 2, who is closer to site, travels to third location, and Inspector 1 conducts the inspection remotely. Sharing both data and resources keeps quality standards high while providing real-time solutions that increase not only productivity, but reduce safety risk. Additionally, training applications such as knowledge-based capture and just-in-time training can be used to help aid in live scenarios and training environments. No longer are we limited by logistical problems that would traditionally impede the most qualified inspector from performing the job. Vendor-assisted inspections act in a very similar way, as they allow BV experts to conduct inspections through remote technologies to conduct third-party inspections through vendor QC. For this use case, we address some internal value drivers, but hopefully we have shown how to apply this externally as well. Remote and enhanced inspections are not mutually exclusive. Where remote inspections focus primarily on physical versus virtual presence, enhanced inspections centers around enabling inspectors with more resources. Integration is key here, and in this use case, we are treating a remote inspection or application as an execution type more than a delivery model. For this use case, we'll take a look at emissions monitoring, a division within BV that assists with leak detection and repair, data management and maintenance, and provides staff training while incorporating the applicable jurisdictional regulations. Enhancements tend to focus on three things: access, integrations, and flow of information validation. Inspectors take measurements, in this case at refinery plants, to monitor gas emissions. Using wearables and enhanced inspection applications allows data to be captured in line with the inspection process. IoT data is fed into the reporting tools to deliver a cohesive picture of the readings. Additionally, we are able to use 3D scans of plants to tie into spatial endpoint cloud mapping to tag assets and maintain a full overview of the maintenance program. This begins to walk the line of enhanced versus augmented, but you can see how these examples lead into other solution discoveries. In this case, we're focused on three areas: integrated systems. They act as validation and help to provide data governance. Remote intelligence, or what we like to call intelligence or field intelligence. This is because collaboration is not just a see what I see feature, but using mixed reality, augmented reality, and virtual reality collaboration using 3D scans can turn that online support into offline support. And lastly, data visualization, data models, predictive analysis, and other decision-making tools. This together creates a cohesive application landscape that really integrates this enhanced inspection process to enable our inspectors to see more, do more, and know more. To continue the topic of enhanced inspections, we find ourselves at the last use case for today's webinar. I would say that we saved the best for last, but that's just not true. This may seem complicated or complex, but the reality, no pun intended, is that they all augment our reality, which is a fancy way to say increase. With increase of knowledge and ability, this technology has and will continue to change the way we conduct business and increase the standard of quality in every industry. Microsoft's HoloLens is a topic that many are intrigued by, but know little about. We were in the same boat only a few years ago, but we knew we did not want to find a solution that was looking for a problem. The graphic displayed shows a traditional versus on-demand inspection request process. This allows you to see clearly how technology can greatly improve the speed of data flow and service deliverable. For us, augmented devices were merely another way to execute on an already stable, proven model of delivering quality. The challenge was not the technology, it was everything else. Over the last few use cases, we've gone over how the process and the information flows, and having systems in place to manage and govern the data is critical. Today we'll be talking about industrial inspections for our last case. There is a division within BV that provides quality assurance for shop inspections and in service and manufactured equipment for our customers' drilling completions operations. In 2018, BV performed a pilot with the first model of HoloLens, HoloLens version 1. During this phase, we learned a lot about how to apply this technology to real-world problems. The safety has always been a key factor and something that has driven the value and been a key factor in a lot of these use cases. But for BV, it's actually one of our three absolutes, and it's one of the key advantages to augmented inspections. Using holographic projections, we were able to compare as-designed to as-built models with real-time collaboration. This provided additional value through speed of problem detection and allowed for safer working environments. No need for scaffolding or fall protection training. Not only did we provide remote holographic inspections between 3 countries on a live video stream, We did this using a data connection from a cell phone in a metal building. This leads into a few of the takeaways from this use case. 1, solutions do exist. 2, technology is no longer the barrier to success. And lastly, being safe does not mean being slower. Thank you so much for your time. And with that, I'm going to hand it back off to Kyle. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Christopher. So now that we've seen how this can be deployed in a variety of use cases, you're probably keen to understand how you can leverage it and how you get started. We do think there are a couple of good considerations that you should work through to see how ready your organization is. And so the first one is contractual obligations. We want to do a quick review of the contract to make sure there's no language in there that could prohibit us from delivering this type of service. The second one is really around vendor acceptance. And so this is us recognizing that the relationship isn't always directly between Bureau Veritas and the vendor. And so that third-party working relationship, we need to make sure in those situations we've got all the stakeholders understanding what's going to happen and make sure everyone feels comfortable with it. We want to make sure folks are okay with a device being brought into their environment that has recording capability. And if there are concerns around filming proprietary processes, we can take steps to ensure that we don't include that on the video feed and on the recording. The third one's around site connectivity. Really critical when we're talking about remote inspections because we are dealing with transferring and streaming data via the internet. And so we need to either have access to a consistent or a solid Wi-Fi network or be able to tap into a cell phone network to transfer data. We don't need much, which is really good. Some of the solutions that we deploy can operate in very low bandwidth environments. So that allows us to have another level of flexibility. The fourth one is environmental factors. The reality is not all hardware devices are going to work as well in different physical conditions. For example, some devices work better inside than outside. Some don't respond well to situations that have high heat or are really cold. And so we want to make sure that we match the right hardware to the physical environment that the inspection is going to be taking place in. The fifth one is really around risk review and mitigation. Over the coming weeks, and as we deal with the situation at hand, we expect that we'll probably stretch the use cases as far as we can. And as such, we may introduce some additional risk because we have to recognize that remote inspection will not be 100% replacement for traditional inspection by a Bureau Veritas expert. There are some tactile components that will need to be executed. And so for those shortcomings, we just need to walk through them, discuss them, and then work with our customers and our vendors to understand how we can put in mitigating factors to make sure that we don't feel like we're compromising the quality of the end deliverable. Once all those things are reviewed, it's really easy to get up and running. We have two primary applications that we support. The first one is we do like to use Microsoft Teams to support these calls. It does have a lot of great functionality out of the box that we can use. If that's the case, and if you have a Microsoft Teams account, it really is as simple as opening it up and accepting the call. For other situations where advanced illustration is required, or on-screen annotation, or dealing with a low bandwidth environment, then we probably want to use one of our other solutions. And in that case, that service will be initiated by sending you an email or an SMS text message. All you have to do is open up that email or that text message, download the app if it's the first time you're launching this inspection, and then once it's downloaded and installed, go back to that message, click login, and then you're going to be immediately brought into that application. So in this case, it really is as simple as 1, 2, 3. If we bring all these themes together, or bring all this information together, we hope that 3 main themes really came through today. The first one is that Bureau Veritas is here, and we're ready to support you through this service transition. The second one is the service is applicable to a variety of use cases and can be used to overcome a diverse set of challenges. we didn't have time to go through every possible use case today. So if you didn't see one that's directly applicable to you, please keep in mind that we probably can still satisfy that requirement. Please don't hesitate to reach out to your Bureau Veritas representative or Christopher and I directly, and we'll see how we can support you. The third one is that the technology is here, it's ready, and it's easy to deploy. And it's not and should not be considered a barrier to entry or adoption of the service. So with all that being said, you might have some questions on top of your mind, and we really want to hear back from you on that. So we'd like to transition to our Q&A section of this webinar, and we have the pleasure of being joined by Keith Grogan, who's the Vice President of our Industrial Inspections team. And we also have Kim Pluty, who is the Vice President and COO of our Quick Track division. Both have supported, have had their operations team and their division support remote inspections and can speak to some of that firsthand experience. So with that being said, let's jump into these questions and see what's on your mind.
So the question is, we've talked a lot about benefits, but can you please be more specific on how we're proposing to do a remote flooring inspection for auto dealers? How are you doing remote inspections now? Anytime we're dealing with a really specific set of requirements for an inspection, I would say it's always great to have that conversation with your Bureau Veritas representative and work through step by step what that's going to look like. In general, what we're talking about here, though, is facilitating that process with remote inspection technology. And so we would still use that in conjunction with the other tools that we have available. So in the case of Quick Track, we do have our remote field app that's used by our inspectors to go through that process step by step. If they're not deployed to that site to conduct that step-by-step inspection, that remote session will be held with directly with a Quick Track representative back in the office. They will still go through that same protocol that field person would be going through, and they'll be entering that information into a similar format to make sure that we have all the validations still occurring, and then we've got all the necessary data captured. Essentially the person on site that is helping to facilitate that inspection, in this case our client, they'd be acting as our eyes and our ears. In terms of training, so we have a second question here around training for field technicians. So luckily, it's a really straightforward application to use, very user-friendly. So we don't feel like extensive training will be really needed. However, in the event that there are some questions, we are in a live streaming situation, so the Bureau Veritas representative that you're in contact with will be able to walk through any of the application functions in real time with you in the first couple of minutes of that inspection. The question that came in is around how we are storing records. So again, it's going to depend on the division that we're working with in here and the collaborative tools that are being deployed specific to that, because the answer is going to vary a little bit. But suffice to say, we are storing the records within our system. Some of these applications as well have built-in storage that we can store the videos and the photos and the annotated documents temporarily throughout that session, and then download that into our network. And it's really important to note that that storage of that data and the process itself has been vetted through security protocols, so you can be comfortable that those records are safely stored. In terms of, so there's another question here around what specific equipment we're using. So when it comes to the hardware, we do have lots of options at our disposal. We have deployed HoloLens, HMT ones. We however, do feel that majority of the time, especially in a short deployment situation like this, where we don't want to burden everyone with too much capital expense in terms of additional hardware, the reality is most of this can be done with iPads and iPhones. So we are, and I'm using iOS devices there, but they can support Android devices as well. And that's going to be the best way to kind of get running, hit the ground running, and get up and running. Next question: how do we see it shaping the future of inspections? I really do think that we're pretty early on here, and I want to go back to that data governance component and that data integration. When we think about being able to have real-time access to all those data elements, it allows us to really focus in on high-risk areas. And so I think within that there's two things. One is we get that real-time data exchange that allows us to have data continuity throughout the entire workflow. But secondly, it allows us to really focus in on what we want to, and that essentially mirrors the transition into a risk-based inspection type approach versus a protocol-based inspection approach. So that's one of the key drivers we think that will change over the coming years. There was a question about whether the webinar was recorded and if it'll be available later, because unfortunately I was not able to attend the first 15 minutes. This is a recorded session, and it will be available on YouTube for subsequent viewing. I believe we'll also be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint presentation to the attendees, so you'll have that as reference material. And finally, we also have a white paper on the matter that we could share with you guys that speaks to some of these points in different format. Next one was, can we involve a client rep while performing the remote video inspection? Yes, absolutely. That's certainly a benefit of it, that real-time digital collaboration from different geographies and different stakeholders. Is a real benefit. So that allows us to make sure that the client rep is part of it. They understand what's going on, and that certainly helps to elevate the value of the overall service offering. What is the time scale on the x-axis of the maturity COVID-19 effect? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we're in an accelerated mode. I think it's going to be a function of how long COVID-19 actually lasts. If we hit peak and we start pulling away from this and economies open up and travel restrictions start declining, in the next 4 weeks, then I think that's going to lead to a more protracted or prolonged growth phase. If we find ourselves dealing with a situation where we are on full travel ban, full lockdown, well into next year, then I think we'll be forced as participants in this broader community to really change our working models and really start to modify our back end processes to leverage this technology and this capability. And in those cases, I think we're going to see what would have otherwise taken 12 to 24 months occur in 3 to 6 months. And I want to point out, it's never going to get to 100% of the use cases. I shouldn't say never. I don't foresee it getting to 100% of the use cases in the next 6 months, but rather where we see a high rate of adoption within those situations that are well suited for it. Is it possible to see some recording of enhanced inspection and have some commentary on what's happening? Yeah, we can tell that. We don't have it on demand right now, but we do have some recorded inspections. It is of a client site, so we do need to respect the client's privacy in multiple client sites and multiple videos. So let us take that away and let's see if we can obtain client's permission to share that or remove any sensitive information, and then you can see what that enhanced inspection looks like. Because it is really neat to see how that 3D model overlays on that asset and how you can quickly understand what's out of conformance and how you can take measurements using the HoloLens. Okay, so how many parties can attend the live stream on separate devices? Also, can the stream be captured as a video and later sent as an email? So yeah, the video can be captured. For the specific number of maximum attendees, I'll defer to Christopher actually on that one. We haven't hit that max yet. Christopher, would you be able to provide some commentary on that?
Sure. Yeah. So it really kind of depends on the connection quality and the quality of the signal. In a Teams environment, you can get up to 200 plus. in a remote application with low bandwidth, we typically see more than 4 or 5. We start having some complications, but that's just because we're in those low band areas. But in a good quality connection, you can have as many of over 100 easily. So it just really depends on the bandwidth and the signal quality of that area.
Great, thanks, Christopher.
Absolutely.
So there was a question around if we have specialists provide help in developing factory acceptance testing for incorporation into specifications. Yeah, so anytime there's a very rigid SOPs and adheres to protocol, we can work with you guys through that situation. We do have experts that would be able to support this from around our network, both locally and in other geographies. There's a question around whether we have specific cost reduction numbers and average replacement of on-site versus remote. So I assume that second part of that question is really around adoption. So in terms of specific cost reduction numbers, it does depend on the type of inspection we're dealing with and the situation we're dealing with. In some cases, for example, a dimensional overlay validation, we're seeing a process that would have taken days be reduced into hours. So there's certainly a lot of on-site efficiency. And so I think it also depends on how extensive you want to be with your model. So we've got the really easy stuff to quantify, like elimination of the travel expense and just the associated expenses with that, a reduction in the actual inspection time spent on site. But then there's the secondary considerations, such as how much time are people on site spending with that inspector on site to support their process. And so that's a soft cost, but it still is a real cost that's being incurred by the organization. So you do need to factor that in as well. So there's I don't have a hard and fast number, but we'd be happy to work with you to help build a model that's specific to your business, so you can understand how exactly it's going to impact you, and then I'll give you a sense of what you'd be looking at. Would you be able to do an end of the month volume inspection remotely? I don't want to overcommit because I'm not sure on that actual specific use case, but I will say that if it can be visually confirmed, and if we incorporate some additional checks and balances to make sure that there's no chance of fraud, then I don't see why I wouldn't be able to do that. So if this is an inventory validation, for example, then we'd be able to go in. You can zoom in on particular serial codes to validate the actual asset. And if there's concern that the individual isn't actually at the physical site and they're possibly moving to another location and filming somebody else's inventory, the way we actually recommend that is actually a pretty dealing with that is actually a pretty low-tech solution, and it's as simple as going outside the building and keeping the live stream going and doing a quick 360 of the surroundings. Then you'd be able to validate the actual physical location of the inspection, and you can also use geotagging as well to give you that confidence that's being done correctly. Is the field person at the other side of the inspection expected to be a qualified person as the one writing the report back in the office? Again, it slightly depends on the use case. In general, though, what we're saying here is you don't need to be a qualified person. We bring that qualified person to you through that remote streaming. However, in some cases where we're doing a collaborative inspection, we will have someone on site that perhaps is qualified in one area of that inspection, and then they would be reaching out to other folks of the network to draw upon their qualifications and their expertise and bring them into that inspection. Do we have data that shows what equipment was successful? If the inspection was good, do you have feedback from equipment being in service with minimum failures? Yeah, so we can go into some more specifics. So if we take a look at the HoloLens, for example, we really think it's a neat technology. But But that's an example where we did experience some issues working in direct sunlight. Wasn't ideal, and also in really high temperature locations that the equipment wasn't able to operate within those physical conditions. And so in that situation, we failed over to using an iPad, and the iPad was able to work well. And that's the good thing about having iPads and iPhones and Android devices being the majority of the deployments, because it's really easy to test a site. If your phone's going to work within that environment, then the remote inspection is going to work within that environment. We did see some good advancements with HoloLens 2. That was recently released to the market, both in ease of use as well as expanding the battery life and also a little more tolerance for those environmental conditions. And so we are slowly on in that advanced hardware, and so there will continue to be developments, and it still is far outpacing our developments in other areas of consideration. How are dealer customers responding when being asked to complete their own inspection? Do they have concerns? I think I wish Kim's mic was right, because she'd be able to answer that directly. But if I had to, from what I've heard and from the feedback that I've gathered, is there aren't any objections right now, especially given the circumstances you're dealing with. People don't want other people coming on site, and for them, it allows them to do it kind of in a hassle-free way. It's real time, as opposed to having conversations kind of staggered throughout the service delivery. It can all be truncated into a relatively condensed inspection. So having that, having a verbal communication followed by a real-time inspection, it converts it into one activity. So we haven't had any pushback at this stage, and if there is, then I think it's the subsequent course of action would be understand where their concerns lie. Is it a privacy concern? Is it around a recording device? Is it around they feel that they need to do more work? And that's a consideration, and we still have the other means that will be available to deploy when we relaxed travel bans. But given that we do have to keep business going, I think that people are more willing to accept some of those initial and overcome some of those initial hesitations. Okay, so one of the slides showed a visual representation of a complex piping system with an inspector performing inspection of that 3D model. What are some of the difficulties of those kind of remote inspection? Who designs the model, the project owner or BV? Yeah, great. That's a good question. So, one of the things that we're seeing there in the early days of using those 3D models is one of the biggest challenges, actually just figure out how we get that model loaded into the system. It's not a hard task to overcome. It just takes a little more consideration than it will as the service becomes more highly adopted. And it kind of goes back to that data flow concept. Once we reduce the friction of exchanging those models and we have clear ownership over those models and clear access, then that becomes a lot easier. Right now, the models are typically owned by the customer, and so they are releasing those models to us in order to conduct that inspection. So the model itself is usually designed by the engineering firm as part of that build process, and that's passed back to the customer, who then shares it with us. Longer term, we do see that being more streamlined, and we see that data model being held in a consistent manner and information being fed to it. So we're constantly augmenting the data that's associated with that asset through that model. So then we start to understand the changes and the events that occurred over time. If you're using iPads and iPhones as hardware, any issues of intrinsically safe? So there are cases that allows iPhones and iPads to be ATEX certified, but Christopher, do you want to confirm or confirm that for me?
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, iPhones do not have that ability. However, there are some companies out there that make specifically designed cases for iPads, but it does require you to take the iPad out of its manufactured case and put it within. So it's basically you're disassembling the iPad, putting it into this ATEX certified casing. But for in most areas that we're having to deploy, the ATEX certifications are required. HMT ones are going to be our go-to as they already have that dedication certification within the hardware.
Excellent, thank you. In the event that a vendor does not allow phones or video on site, how might we work around that? So in this case, we do need to have a filming device on site. That's the only way that we're going to be able to deliver that. And so our recommended course of action there is again to have all stakeholders kind of work through that and understand what objections exist. We do see coming down the pipeline some software changes that we think will help ease this. And so more specifically, what we're referring to there is some companies are developing AI technology to actively blur out the background. And so that would eliminate blur out the background. So only the asset that's being inspected is subject to being filmed. And that I think that will help overcome a lot of that resistance. And in addition to that, how we treat that data, who has access to that video, and the protocols being put in place there should add a level of confidence or comfort with that end vendor to allow them to make an accommodation under these circumstances. I think a lot of it, to be frank, I think a lot of it is legacy concern. I think people are becoming more open and more accepting of being filmed and of being recorded. And I want to be clear that as we go down this path, privacy is always top of mind for us. Even as we look at camera technology within our own organization and how we're using that within our lab network, we do hold ourselves up to a very high standard as it relates to privacy and confidentiality, and that standard extends to the work that we do with our customers.